We do invite to take a seat. I think what we're going to be doing. Oh, Josh, welcome. Everyone, please, if you're here, grab a cookie, grab what you want. We're going to start. I think what we're going to do is the women's section is going to be on this side, and the men's section will be on this side. Sure. That's the chocolate milk.
Okay.
That's actual chocolate milk.
Okay.
Then there is the soy milk, which is in the box.
Okay.
So, as people are, and people should continue to get refreshments, I just wanted to begin to introduce with really very short remarks. The first and foremost thing that I wanted to say is that we'd like to really thank everyone who came, who wanted to come, who encouraged us, even if they couldn't make it this time, and even more so, all the people who, obviously Rabbi Brody, Joe Rebeck for hosting, Yosef Brown for setting up this laptop, and all the people who are helping this come together, because this is really for us. It's for us because it's for my wife's father, Avram Ben Perla, but even more so, it's for us because, when this happened, we looked to ourselves and said, what's an area that we personally can work on? And how are we going to be able to work on it? And we said, the right way to make sure you're going to do something is to find a chabura, find people who are going to come together to do it with you. So I really want to thank everyone for turning out, because this is really helping us in our growth. And really one very brief opening thought about B'lei V'chad. First of all, the idea here, as many of you hopefully know, is to have a monthly meeting. We're starting with a little chabura here, a little group in this room. Those who would come, see who would be able to show up, and Be'ezrat Hashem, it should continue to grow, and maybe even get bigger. We'll take it 1 month at a time. Hopefully, meeting around this time monthly. The name of the organization, B'lei V'chad, means with one heart. With one heart represents the idea of Jewish unity. We're in the period of Sfirat HaOmer, and Rashi tells us in the name of Chazal that when the Jews stood at Har Sinai, they stood Ish Echad B'lei V'chad, with one heart. And that is critical to the Jewish acceptance of the Torah and of the mitzvos, is that we do it as a one people together. And so it's a great time coming up to Shavuos to be kicking this off. It's also, for those who are paying attention to Kensher, we didn't realize this originally, but apparently this is also the anniversary of Yom Yerushalayim, of the conquering of Yerushalayim, and Yerushalayim as well. Ir Shechubur Lo Yachdav is a symbol of Jewish unity, of coming together. And with that, I just want to thank Rabbi Brody one more time, and without further ado, Rabbi Brody with our share for this month.
Yashakach to Rabbi Tovi and to Gigi for prodding us to grow. As the full reach of this project, this initiative became known to me, and I realized that this was international and cross-continental, with many chaburas around, it dawned upon me that this is not an initiative, but really a campaign. A campaign to prod the Jewish people out of exile. So I thought it must be that Mrs. Bergman must be then running for Mashiach. This is more than a sheer. This is really an audacious challenge for growth. Usually the introduction, when you come to something that's engaging, is sit back and enjoy and relax. But that's not the introduction here. Because this is really going to penetrate us and cause us to change fundamentally. And essentially the initiative touches on the nerve of the Jewish people. Because what stands at the center of all exile and destruction is really sinas chinam, hatred. Beginning with Yosef and his brothers, who initiated the very first exile, that sinna, that hatred between the brothers, initiated the first exile into Egypt. during the first Beis HaMikdash, the first temple, that ultimate destruction initiated itself with the split of the two kingdoms, hatred. And finally, and most pointedly, is the final exile, initiated by the Roman Empire, but really caused by the Jewish people. HaChachamim teach us that it was sinas chinam, hatred of one to the other, that really was the cause of that exile. So it would seem reasonable to us that if the kilkul, the destruction, is sinah, then the tikkun, the correction, would be ahava, would be love. And so therefore, what we would deem as reasonable, the great Rav Kook, Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who was an ish ahava, a man of love, made this point precisely. And he wrote, if we were destroyed in the world with us due to baseless hatred, then we shall rebuild ourselves in the world with us with baseless love. So in a sense, tonight, and all the shiurim that will follow, is a challenge to each person as a yachid, as an individual, to bring Ahavas Yisrael into their own lives, to elevate themselves to become an Oev Yisrael. It's a challenge to community, that within community begins to relate to each other with Ahavas Yisrael, with love one Jew for the other. And in a certain sense, it also echoes the cry of the prophets. Because when the prophets, by the call of God, would go out into the street, they spoke to all of Israel when they gave their message. And this call of Avas Yisrael is a call to the individual, it's a call to the community, and really, even though it's just a handful of people, it's a call to Klal Yisrael, to all the Jewish people. When we say the Shema every day, we have that very similar intent. We say Shema Yisrael. And when we say Shema Yisrael, we're calling to all of Israel, all the Jewish people. Shema Yisrael, listen, Jewish people. Baal HaTanya teaches, though, that the word Yisrael also refers to an aspect of the neshama, a certain aspect of the soul called Yisrael. When you close your eyes and you say Shema Yisrael, you're not only calling to the whole community of the Jewish people, you're also calling to yourself. To strive for Avas Yisrael is to begin with much more than behavioral change. Much more than beginning to do things. To undertake such an enormous task, such an enormous avoda, service, as to try to learn Ahavas Yisrael, love of the Jewish people, it must penetrate to the core, and it must begin there. And for us, when we speak about our core, we speak about our thoughts. Real change is internal change. And the word we're really searching for is orientation. And orientation is a tendency of thought. It's a general inclination. A security guard has a certain orientation. His orientation is that he's very aware of things that might be suspicious. His orientation is danger, aware of people that pose as potential dangerous people, and as items that can be used as dangerous weapons. A mother has an orientation. Orientation of a mother is for the safety of her children. She's constantly aware of her children and the nuances and calls in their voice if there is some concern to their safety. A businessman has an orientation to an opportunity. He looks and he sees potential, opportunity, a way to make something. And there's also an orientation to the Ish HaRuchani and the Ish HaGashmi. Spiritual man and physical man. There's a certain orientation, a way of thinking, a tendency of thought that composes the Ish HaRuchani, the spiritual person. And there's a certain way of thinking, a certain trend of thought that characterizes the Ish HaGashmi, the instinctual person. And if we can understand the orientation of the Ish HaRuchani, spiritual man, in this way of Avas Yisrael, of the Jewish people, we can begin to become sensitized to the core, to the inner change of Avas Yisrael.
Can I just back up a second? When we say Avos Yisrael, what are we focusing on translating as well? What is it? What does the words mean? What is the? I mean, I'm sure you're going to explain it.
Yes.
When you say these words, what does?
I think it'll become apparent. Yeah. Well, our perspective and our experience from which we see the world, we call our I. Our I is our physical, our emotional, intellectual, spiritual needs and desires. It's from this I that I view, perceive, and experience everything I do as an individual. That I is me. And it begins in my mind and often ends at my nose. This is the orientation of the Ish HaGashmi, of an instinctual person. This is the I from which they see the world. Someone who gets married might extend this I. In this I, they might include a spouse. They might include their children. So that they put in, from where how they perceive and they relate, my children are part of me. My spouse is part of me. This is also part of my I. Often, though, this is where it ends. Everyone else is another, you. So there is I, and there is you. This was brought home to me one Lag BaOmer, when there was a circle of men dancing dangerously close to the fire, and a young wife of one of the men called out to her husband, "Be careful of the fire. I'm only concerned about you." So this I, how we experience things, has the potential to grow a bit, but often this is the end of the I. This is the Ish HaGashmi, the instinctual person. The Ish HaRuchani, the spiritual person, the orientation, is also an I. But his I isn't me, it's we. The Ish HaRuchani, the I, sees people, we, incorporated part of his I. It is not I and you are another. I see you also from my perspective. I can consider you as well. The I of the Ish HaRuchani is like when we say Hashem Echad, God is one. When we say God is one, we don't mean he is one and everything else is outside of him. It's I and you. Echad is one and everything is within this one. This is the perspective, the experience, the thinking of the I, the orientation of a person that trains themselves, that orients themselves to be a ruchni, to be a spiritual person. We have many, many madregos, many levels that's important to be aware of. In beginning, Avas Yisrael, and all of the detailed service and work that we might do. At the outset, it's very important to realize how far it can go. There's a great tzaddik in Yerushalayim in the 1900s, early 1900s, by the name of Rabbi Levine. And Rabbi Levine was famous as a righteous, loving, and beloved person. And story is told of Rabbi Aryeh that he once went with his wife to the doctor, and he said to the doctor, "Her foot is hurting us." This is how far the eye can go. There were tzaddikim that never spoke of themselves, but the word I, but the word we. Because they saw from their perspective this I, we, many. And it can go, and it can grow to the perspective of how Hillel saw things. The great Hillel once said, "Imani kan hakol kan." If I am here, everybody's here. The statement is very surprising and needs interpretation. But this is the meaning. When Hillel saw something, and he experienced something, it wasn't a self, an individual, an I that was distinct from a you. This is an I that incorporated people. If I am here, everyone is here. Because from this vantage point of Hillel, his I included everybody. There was no other. There was no I and you. And that's really the first, or the initial place of Avas Yisrael. The beginning point in developing the orientation of the Ish HaRuchani, the spiritual person, to develop this I, is not to say I versus you. When I pit myself against another person, and it's me and it's you, or it's my family and you are not my family, and I begin to draw a circle, and I make an I versus you, this is the thinking of an Ish HaGashmi, of an instinctual person. To be competitive, to need to be better, to be greater than, and to denigrate. All of these feelings, from it comes jealousy, and all other feelings, including sin and hatred, begin with that orientation. And so the beginning place of Avas Yisrael, wherever it can reach, and where it begins, is to develop the orientation that my I, who I am, includes many. It's not just me and my own personal needs, including spiritual. It's not just my child, my son or my daughter. It's not just my spouse. But my I includes Yisrael, the Jewish people. And that orientation, at least can begin for a person to at least see others not as competition, not as threat, not as another, from which all of these other midos, negative character traits, come from. This orientation of this this type of I, is found in our Chachamim and Chazal and in many of the Svarim that follow, all driving toward this point and this orientation. It's a well-known Gemara in the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechta Nedarim, that our Chachamim give a mashal to try to depict this, of a butcher who's cutting meats. And whilst he's cutting the meats, he cuts a finger of his other hand. And so the Chachamim say, it would make sense for the other hand then to take the knife and take vengeance on the other hand for cutting it. This is illogical because it is the very same person. Say Chazal, Yisrael guf echad. Yisrael in essence are one body. The true spiritual nature of the Jewish people is as one entity. And as it's illogical for us to conceive of the person taking vengeance on himself, so it is for one Jew to take vengeance on another. It's Chazal driving you toward the orientation that Yisrael guf echad. Yisrael is one. We are one. We see it as the individual without having to use a mashal, parable. For us to see it, Yisrael, many types of people, individuals as one, we need to borrow the mashal. The Maharal, in his work called Nesiv Ahavas Reya, the path of love of another, love of a friend. He writes the following thing. He says, "V'davar zeh inyan gadol ma'od." This matter is exceedingly important. Sheyel v'esreu kumosa, that a person loves his friend like himself. And he says, "Avol davar zeh," but this matter, b'shvil sheyisrael heim am echad, is because the Jewish people are one people. Umitzad zeh, it's from this perspective. Ra'yi is proper. Shiyu Yisrael kamo Adam echad legamre. That the Jewish people are completely one person. This is the cause of the mitzvah of Yahavta l'recha kamocha. That you love your neighbor, friend, like yourself. Like he is you. You love him in the same way. Like you love yourself. That self-love is obvious because that's your instinctual I. L'recha kamocha, your friend who's outside of you is kamocha, is like you. You have to love him in the very same way because you have to see him as part of your I, how you experience. The Baal Tanya, Rosh Ner Zalman of Liadi, in his work, the Tanya, in Perek Lamed Beis, it's a chapter dedicated toward Avas Yisrael. He writes that all of Yisrael are called Achim, are called brothers, by virtue, he says, of the source of their souls. Only their bodies are separate. Rak hagufim mechulakim. In essence, Yisrael is one. The distinction that we see is just a matter of guf, it's a matter of body. But that's not its true definition of Yisrael. Chazal from that Gemara, the Maharal, the Baal Tanya, all leading us toward this orientation. At the beginning place of Avas Yisrael, and everything that will follow, begins with seeing this way. Yisrael is really one. It's an idea that could become what we call a hasaga. Hasaga means that you not only understand it conceptually, but you perceive it as such. The concept that we were talking about, Yisrael Guf Echad, is a concept, but it's also a perception of reality. When Rabbi Aryeh Levine felt the pain to his wife or himself, that was his reality. He perceived it as such. It wasn't a concept that he had read in a book or heard a story about a person. That's how he experienced it. So when we speak about Ahavas Yisrael and to undertake it, you are really speaking about trying to absorb a concept and then have it slowly become a hasaga, a perception, a way that you see it. This type of shiur and the shiur that will follow are all in the derech, in the path of what we call avodas Hashem, work. If you come to a shiur and you're hearing someone give a dissertation on a subject that's interesting to you, that's not avodah, it's not work. If you go to a shiur and someone reads off the Gemara, so then you are passively listening. But if you go to a shiur where there are ideas spoken and concepts spoken about that we have to integrate, that we have to begin to feel, we have to begin to see, that's called avoda, that's called service. Which really means the moment the shiur is over, your work begins. And being that a space is shortened by a month, it gives you a month, at least, to work on hasaga, on working on the perception of the truth of Yisrael Guf Echad, that Yisrael is one entity. If it seems a far reach, I'll give you a mashal, and that you will very clearly see it as not. In an organization that is done well, that there is proper leadership, and there's camaraderie, and there is the feeling of we are building this together, there could be the potential for people to see themselves as we. This is our organization. This is us. This is what we are striving for. This is what we want to accomplish. And so, as mundane as it might be, even a business, if the concept over the organization is we as a team are striving for something, so then it gives the employees a perception of we. Maybe there's no better mashal to this, to see how it works, than lahavdil, to separate being kodesh l'chol in sports. In sports, you have a coming together of the largest egos on one team. Individually, they would conquer each other. They would best each other. But because they are a team and they're striving for one goal, then there's the great potential for each superstar not to see themselves as I, but as in we. As they say in that field, there's no I in team. So you see that by way of parable, how individuals can see themselves not as a distinct I. Even that great superstar might pass up the shot to make the pass for the win. That's a win for the team. So individuals have the potential to move out of a perception of I and into a perception of we. But of course, it's very important to see how our tzaddikim did this and perceived this and spoke this. And one of the great tzaddikim, and is especially shown in the area of Avas Yisrael, was Harav Kook that I mentioned before. And Rav Kook left over many, many writings that were unpublished after he passed, and they were subsequently collected and they were published. And many of the writings of Rav Kook reveal personal writings, somewhat akin to like you'd enter into a diary. Except in Rav Kook, it carries this concept called hasaga, perception, where the ideas that he had he expressed as a feeling. So it wasn't simply an emotion, and it wasn't simply a concept, but it was how he perceived something. And this is what Rav Kook writes in this regard. This is collected in the writings called Shmona Kavatzim. He writes, "Listen to me, my people. I speak to you from my soul, from within my innermost soul. I call out to you from the living connection by which I am bound to all of you, and by which all of you are bound to me. I feel this more deeply than any other feeling, that only you, all of your souls, throughout all of your generations, you alone are the meaning of my life. In you I live. In the aggregation of all of you, my life has that content that is called life. Without you I have nothing. All hopes, all aspirations, all purpose in life, all that I find inside myself, these are only when I am with you. I need to connect with all of your souls. I must love with a boundless love. Each one of you, each individual soul from the aggregation of all of you, is a great spark from the torch of infinite light, which enlightens my existence. You give meaning to life and work, to Torah and prayer, to song and hope. It is through the conduit of your being that I sense everything and love everything." That's perception. Born out in real life, Rav Kook was a person that had many supporters and many enemies. And it once occurred that Rav Kook was walking through the streets on the way home from a bris milah, a bris of a student, and he was surrounded by students. And people that were ardently opposed to Rav Kook and were zealous to act against him, poured some terrible, foul liquid upon him and completely drenched him. The students were so offended, so hurt by the slight to the honor of their Rebbe. And when they got home, there was a whole group of people surrounding Rav Kook. And one of the people there was one of the people in the British government that controlled the land of Israel. And he said to Rav Kook, he said, you need to press charges. And if you press charges against this person, we will be able to throw them out of the land of Israel, Palestine. Rav Kook said, I can never do that. I love all of them. He said these words, I want to kiss all of them. From that feeling that he had comes from that perspective, that hasaga, that perception. That even though they saw it as you versus I, that's not how he saw it. And as zealous as an opponent as he had, he saw them as we. And for us, that's really our beginning. Our beginning in undertaking Avos Yisrael and all the pratim, all the details and details of types of avoda that we need to work on begin with a shorish, begin with a root. And that root is beginning to see. And if we will do the avoda, we'll do the spiritual work of taking those ideas and integrating them as concepts, as feelings, then we'll begin to think, feel, and to see more and more from that perspective. Beginning with the very simple and with the potential to grow, to truly become an Ohev Yisrael. So you have a month to think about it. You should have Matzah Tzlacha together doing this avoda.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Brody. Thank you.